The massive holographic display flickered to life in the center of Earth's United Defense Command, casting an eerie blue glow across the faces of humanity's finest military leaders. Admiral Sarah Chen straightened her uniform as the alien figures materialized before them, their forms both magnificent and terrifying. The Galactic Council had finally made contact, but their message was not one of welcome. Ambassador Zekthor of the Vralian Empire stepped forward, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light as he spoke. His voice resonated through the chamber with an otherworldly authority that made lesser species tremble across the galaxy. Primitive humans of the third planet from your yellow star, you have violated the sacred accords of galactic law. Your species has spread beyond your designated quarantine zone without permission from the Council. General Marcus Rodriguez, Earth's Chief of Defense, felt his jaw clench. Quarantine zone. They spoke of humanity's expansion into space as if it were some kind of disease that needed to be contained. Behind him, scientists and military advisors exchanged worried glances, but Admiral Chen remained perfectly still, her dark eyes studying every detail of the alien delegation. Your vessels have established colonies in 17 star systems, continued Velnara, the insectoid representative from the Hive Collective. Her compound eyes gleamed as she spoke, mandibles clicking with each word. You have harvested resources from worlds designated as Council reserves. You have made contact with 3 protected species without authorization. These are crimes against the natural order of the galaxy. The third member of the delegation, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical shell, pulsed with angry red light. I am Cognitive Unit 7749 of the Machine Synthesis, it announced in a voice like grinding metal. Our calculations show that your species exhibits dangerous tendencies. Rapid technological advancement combined with territorial expansion and aggressive resource acquisition. You match the profile of 17 previous species that required correction. Admiral Chen stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor. And what exactly does this correction entail? She asked, her voice calm despite the implications of what they were hearing. Ambassador Zekthor's alien features shifted into what might have been a smile, though it looked more like a predator baring its teeth. Complete technological regression, destruction of all spacefaring vessels, permanent orbital monitoring. Your species will be confined to your home planet for the next 10,000 years until you have learned to behave properly. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the chamber, Earth's leaders felt the weight of those words settle over them like a burial shroud. 10,000 years, longer than all of recorded human history. Their children's children's children would live and die on Earth, never knowing the freedom of the stars that humanity had fought so hard to reach. And if we refuse? General Rodriguez asked, though they all suspected they knew the answer. Velnara's mandibles clicked in amusement. Refusal is not an option. The Council controls over 40,000 star systems. We have weapons that can crack planets in half. We have fleets numbering in the millions. Your entire species could be eliminated in a matter of days. She paused, studying their faces with those compound eyes. However, the Council is merciful. Submit now, and your people will be allowed to live. Continue this foolish defiance, and we will demonstrate why the galaxy fears our judgment. Cognitive Unit 7749 projected a series of holographic images into the air above them. Planets reduced to asteroid fields, star systems stripped of all life, entire civilizations erased from existence, leaving only empty space where they once thrived. These species chose resistance, the machine being explained clinically. Their fate serves as education for others who might consider similar foolishness. Admiral Chen watched the images of destruction, but her expression remained unchanged. She had spent 30 years in Earth's military, rising through the ranks during humanity's first tentative steps into space. She had seen the wonder in children's eyes when they learned about the colonies on Mars and Europa. She had watched brave explorers launch themselves toward distant stars with nothing but hope and determination. She had witnessed humanity's greatest achievements, and she would be damned if she let these aliens take that away. "You want our surrender?" she asked quietly. "Complete and unconditional," Zekthor confirmed. "Your weapons, your ships, your colonies, all of it must be destroyed or abandoned. Your people will return to Earth and remain there under our supervision." Around the chamber, Earth's leaders shifted uncomfortably. The smart play was obvious. Humanity was barely 300 years into their space age. They had perhaps 1,000 ships scattered across 17 systems, most of them exploration vessels and cargo haulers. Their military consisted of patrol boats and system defense platforms. Against an empire that spanned 40,000 star systems, resistance seemed impossible. But Admiral Chen was thinking about something else entirely. She was remembering the report that had crossed her desk just 3 months ago, the one that most of the Council had been told about but never bothered to investigate. The one about humanity's deep space monitoring stations picking up strange energy signatures in the void between galaxies. The one about the automated probes that had been sending back data for the past 50 years, data that painted a very different picture of the galaxy than what these Council members wanted them to believe. "I have a counter-proposal," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The three aliens exchanged what might have been surprised looks. In their long history of dealing with primitive species, none had ever tried to negotiate after being shown the full might of the Council's power. "You are in no position to make proposals," Zekthor growled. "You will submit or you will be destroyed. Those are your only options." Admiral Chen's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was colder than that, more dangerous. It was the expression of someone who had just realized they were holding a winning hand in a game their opponents thought was already over. "Actually," she said, her voice taking on a tone that made several of the alien delegates step back instinctively, "I think you'll find that we're in a much better position than you realize. You see, you made one critical error in your calculations." "And what error is that?" Velnara asked, her mandibles clicking nervously. Admiral Chen gestured to the holographic display, and the images of Council fleets and conquered worlds dissolved, replaced by something that made all three delegates freeze in shock. It was a star chart, but not of the local galaxy. It showed the vast, empty space between galaxies, and scattered throughout that void were thousands of energy signatures. Ships, massive ships, each one the size of a small moon. "You assumed we were alone," Admiral Chen said, her cold smile growing wider. "You assumed that humanity's expansion into space was recent, primitive, unguided. You never bothered to ask where we really came from, or why our technological advancement has been so remarkably fast for such a primitive species." The aliens stared at the display in growing horror as the implications became clear. Cognitive Unit 7749 was the first to speak, its mechanical voice filled with something that might have been fear. "Impossible. Our scans of your system showed no signs of advanced technology beyond what your species should possess." "That's because you weren't looking in the right places," General Rodriguez said, stepping up beside Admiral Chen. "You scanned our planets, our orbital installations, our ships, but you never thought to check the spaces in between, the places where someone might hide a fleet if they wanted to remain undetected until the right moment." Ambassador Zekthor's crystalline exoskeleton began to change color, shifting from its natural blue to a deep, warning red. "You're bluffing. No species could hide a fleet of that magnitude without the Council's knowledge." Admiral Chen's smile became positively glacial. "The thing about humans," she said, "is that we're very good at learning from other people's mistakes. And over the past 300 years, we've had excellent teachers, species that fell to the Council's mercy. refugees who escaped before their worlds were sterilized, survivors who brought us their technology, their knowledge, their burning desire for revenge. The holographic display shifted again, showing a closer view of one of the massive vessels hiding in the void. It was sleek and deadly, incorporating design elements from dozens of different species, weapon systems that could punch through council shields, stealth technology that made entire fleets invisible, engines that could cross galactic distances in days rather than months. For 3 centuries, Admiral Chen continued, humanity has been preparing for this moment. Every refugee we welcomed, every piece of salvage technology we reverse-engineered, every tactical analysis of your previous conquests, it all led to this. The moment when the Galactic Council would finally take notice of us and come demanding our surrender. Velnara's compound eyes darted between the display and the human leaders, her mind racing to process this new information. Even if this is true, even if you have somehow assembled a fleet, you cannot match the full might of the Council. 40,000 systems, billions of ships, weapons that can destroy stars themselves. You're absolutely right, General Rodriguez agreed. In a straight fight, we couldn't win. That's why we're not going to fight fair. The display changed once more, showing a 3-dimensional map of Council space. Red dots began appearing throughout the galaxy, each one marking a critical infrastructure point. Shipyards, command centers, supply depots, communication relays. There were thousands of them. And as the delegates watched in growing alarm, they realized that each dot represented a target that was already under surveillance by human forces. While you've been busy conquering primitive worlds and showing off your superior technology, Admiral Chen explained, we've been infiltrating your infrastructure. Human operatives disguised as refugees or traders or maintenance workers have been mapping your weaknesses for decades. We know where your fleet staging areas are. We know how your supply chains work. We know which systems would cause cascading failures if they went offline at the right moment. Cognitive Unit 7749's energy form flickered with alarm as it processed the implications. You're talking about guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. Terrorist tactics. We prefer the term asymmetric response, Admiral Chen corrected. You want to play the role of the big scary empire that crushes anyone who doesn't bow down? Fine. But remember that empires have always been vulnerable to the right kind of pressure applied in the right places. Rome learned that lesson from barbarian tribes. The British Empire learned it from colonial rebels. And now the Galactic Council is going to learn it from humanity. The 3 delegates exchanged rapid communications in languages that human translators couldn't follow, their panic evident even across species barriers. They had come expecting to deliver an ultimatum to a primitive species that would have no choice but to submit. Instead, they were facing something they had never encountered before. A species that had been preparing for war since the moment they learned the galaxy wasn't the friendly place they had hoped it would be. Ambassador Zekthor finally regained his composure enough to speak. Even if your claims are true, you would be condemning your own species to destruction. The Council has protocols for dealing with coordinated resistance. We will not simply accept attacks on our infrastructure. We will respond with total annihilation. Will you? Admiral Chen asked. Because here's the thing about total annihilation. It's only an effective threat if your enemy has something centralized that you can destroy. But humans aren't just on Earth anymore. We're scattered across 17 known systems. And thanks to some very helpful refugees from your previous conquests, we've also established hidden colonies in places you've never even thought to look. She gestured, and the display showed a new set of coordinates deep in the galactic rim where ancient civilizations had once thrived before the Council found them. Pocket dimensions, abandoned habitats, worlds that your records say were sterilized but where life has been quietly rebuilding. For 300 years, humanity has been spreading out and digging in, preparing for the day when we would have to fight for our right to exist. The implications were staggering. The Council's preferred method of dealing with rebellious species was swift and brutal. Identify their homeworld and major colonies, apply overwhelming force, and eliminate the threat before it could spread. But if humanity had truly scattered themselves across hundreds of hidden locations, such a strategy would be impossible to implement. "You're insane," Velnara whispered. "You're talking about a war that could last millennia. Billions will die." Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly, and for a moment the cold mask slipped to reveal something more human underneath. Pain, perhaps. Regret. But also determination that burned like a star. "Billions are already dying," she said quietly. "Every time your council decides that a species needs correction. Every time you sterilize a world because its inhabitants dared to dream of something better than servitude. Every time you snuff out the light of civilization because it threatens your precious order." She straightened, and the mask returned. "Humanity has seen what happens to species that submit to your mercy. We've talked to the survivors. We've walked through the ruins of their worlds. We know exactly what your benevolent guidance looks like." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impending conflict. Finally, Cognitive Unit 7749 spoke, its voice carrying a note of something almost like respect. "You understand that this means war. Not just with these individual council members, but with the entire galactic community. You will be branded as criminals, terrorists, enemies of order itself." "Good," Admiral Chen replied without hesitation. "Because from what we've seen, your order is built on the bones of every species brave enough to reach for the stars. If being your enemy is the price of remaining free, then we'll pay it gladly." She turned to face the holographic projectors directly, knowing that her words were being transmitted back to the council chambers where the true rulers of the galaxy sat in judgment. "So, here's our counterproposal," she said, her voice carrying across light years to reach the ears of beings who had never been spoken to in such a manner. "Take your ultimatum, your threats, your superior technology, and your 40,000 star systems, and go find someone else to bully, because humanity isn't interested in your protection, your guidance, or your mercy. We've seen what those things cost, and we're not willing to pay the price." The three delegates seemed to shrink before her words, their confidence evaporating as they realized that they were no longer dealing with a primitive species that could be easily intimidated. They were facing something new, something that the Galactic Council had never encountered in all their millennia of dominance. A species that had learned from their victims' mistakes and was prepared to make them pay for every world they had conquered. "This is your final warning," Admiral Chen continued. "Withdraw from human space. Leave our colonies alone. Find someone else to add to your collection of servile species, because if you choose to press this matter further, you're going to discover just how creative humans can be when their survival is on the line." Ambassador Zekthor's form shimmered with barely contained rage. "You dare threaten the Galactic Council? You pathetic creatures who have barely learned to leave your own star system?" Admiral Chen's cold smile returned, and this time there was something genuinely frightening about it. Something that spoke of sleepless nights spent planning for this exact moment, of decades of preparation and careful positioning, of a species that had looked into the abyss of galactic politics and decided to stare right back. "Oh, we're not threatening you," she said softly. "We're promising you. Touch one human world, harm one human colony, so much as send a harsh message in our direction, and you're going to learn why evolution made us persistence hunters. We'll chase you across the galaxy if we have to. We'll turn your own infrastructure against you. We'll show every oppressed species in Council space that the mighty Galactic Council can bleed." The holographic projection began to flicker as the aliens prepared to terminate the communication, but Admiral Chen wasn't finished. "Sweet dreams, Ambassador," she called out as their forms began to fade. "And remember, we know where you sleep." The projection vanished, leaving Earth's command center in sudden silence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They had just declared war on the most powerful force in known space, and they all knew that there would be no going back from this moment. Finally, General Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Well," he said with dark humor, "I guess we're committed now." Admiral Chen nodded, already turning toward the tactical displays where Earth's military commanders were beginning to implement plans that had been decades in the making. "Signal the fleet commanders," she ordered. "It's time to show the galaxy what humans are really capable of." Outside the command center, across Earth and throughout human space, the word began to spread. The Galactic Council had demanded humanity's surrender, and humanity had responded with a cold smile and a promise of war. The greatest conflict in galactic history was about to begin, and for the first time in millennia, the Council was not going to have everything their own way. In the depths of space, hidden fleets began to move, and the galaxy held its breath. 3 weeks after the ultimatum was delivered, the Galactic Council struck with the fury of gods. Their armada emerged from hyperspace like a plague of mechanical locusts, blotting out the stars above humanity's outer colonies. Admiral Thekvar, Supreme Commander of the Council's military forces, stood on the bridge of his flagship as his sensors registered the pathetic defenses that the humans had assembled. 17 patrol vessels and a handful of orbital platforms, his tactical officer reported, mandibles clicking with amusement. "Shall we begin the bombardment, Admiral?" Thekvar studied the tactical display with the confidence of someone who had conducted this same operation hundreds of times before. The pattern was always the same. Arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior firepower, watch as the primitive species realized the futility of resistance. Usually, they surrendered after witnessing the destruction of a single military installation. Sometimes they required the elimination of an entire colony, but they always broke eventually. "Target their largest platform first," he ordered. "Full power. Let them see what happens to those who defy the Council." The massive dreadnought's primary weapon charged with building energy that made the surrounding space shimmer. Humans aboard the orbital defense platform surely knew what was coming, but their feeble weapons continued firing in desperate defiance. Admirable in its futility, Thekvar thought. Perhaps their quick destruction would be more merciful than a prolonged siege. The beam lanced out across space, carrying enough destructive force to crack a small moon. It struck the defense platform dead center and nothing happened. Thekvar blinked in confusion as his sensors showed the human structure still intact, still firing. The energy readings showed that his weapon had functioned perfectly, delivering its full payload to the target. But somehow, impossibly, the primitive platform had absorbed the blow without taking any apparent damage. "Sensor malfunction," he muttered. "Recalibrate and fire again." The second shot yielded the same impossible result. And the third. By the time his gunners had fired a dozen times, Thekvar was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. Around the bridge, his crew exchanged worried glances as they watched their most powerful weapons fail against what should have been insignificant opposition. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human forces." "On screen," Thekvar ordered, hoping that the humans were finally ready to discuss terms of surrender. The holographic display activated to show a human female in military uniform, standing calmly in what appeared to be the command center of the very platform his fleet had been trying to destroy. She looked directly at him with dark eyes that held no fear, only a cold amusement that made his spine tingle with instinctive alarm. "Admiral Thekvar," she said in perfect galactic standard. "I'm Commander Jessica Park of the Outer Colonies Defense Force. I wanted to thank you for the weapons test. Our new shield technology performed exactly as hoped." Thekvar felt his blood turn to ice. Shield technology. The humans had developed defensive systems that could absorb direct hits from Council dreadnought weapons without so much as a flicker. That should have been impossible. The mathematical principles alone were beyond what any species should achieve without millennia of development. Impossible, he said aloud. Your species lacks the fundamental understanding of energy manipulation required for such technology. Commander Park's smile widened, and Thekvar realized with growing horror that she was enjoying this. You're right, of course. Left to our own devices, it would have taken us thousands of years to develop this technology. Fortunately, we had excellent teachers. The holographic display split, showing additional images that made Thekvar's heart stop beating. There, standing beside the human commander, were beings he recognized with sick certainty. A Kethmori engineer, member of a species the Council had exterminated 50 years ago for refusing to submit to technological restrictions. A Veltaran physicist, whose people had been sterilized after developing weapons the Council deemed too dangerous. A Zarkesh strategic planner, survivor of a civilization that had been erased for the crime of expanding too quickly. Meet some of our consultants, Commander Park said cheerfully. They've been very helpful in explaining exactly how Council technology works, and more importantly, how to defend against it. Turns out that when you've been using the same weapons for 1,000 years, other people start to figure out how to stop them. Around Thekvar, his bridge crew was beginning to show signs of genuine panic. The implications were staggering. If humanity had somehow gathered together survivors from dozens of extinct civilizations, if they had been sharing technology and tactical knowledge for centuries, then everything the Council knew about human capabilities was wrong. You're bluffing, Thekvar said, though his voice lacked conviction. A handful of refugees cannot have provided you with sufficient knowledge to challenge the Council's military supremacy. Want to test that theory? Commander Park asked. She turned to someone off-screen and nodded. Fire when ready. The human platform that moments before had been absorbing his fleet's attacks without damage suddenly blazed with weapons fire. But these weren't the primitive energy beams or kinetic projectiles that the Council expected from younger species. These were weapons that Thekvar recognized with dawning terror because they had once belonged to civilizations that the Council had been forced to destroy, specifically because their military technology had become too threatening. Kethmori phase cannons that could ignore conventional shields. Veltaran gravity torpedoes that turned a ship's own mass against it. Zarkesh quantum disruptors that unraveled matter at the subatomic level. The humans weren't just using refugee knowledge, they were fielding a museum of the galaxy's most feared weapons, technologies that the Council had spent centuries making sure would never be used against them again. Thekvar's flagship shuddered as the first volley struck home, cutting through his shields as if they weren't there. Damage reports flooded his command center as systems throughout the ship began failing in ways that his engineering teams didn't understand. Other vessels in his fleet were suffering similar fates, their superior numbers meaningless against weapons specifically designed to counter everything the Council had. All ships, full retreat, Thekvar ordered, abandoning any pretense of maintaining an offensive posture. Fall back to secondary positions and await reinforcements. But even as his fleet began to withdraw, Commander Park's voice followed them through the communication channels. Running away so soon, Admiral? And here I thought you came to teach us the meaning of superior firepower. The withdrawal became a rout as more human weapons platforms came online, each one revealing new technologies that should have been lost forever when their creators were eliminated. Ships that had ruled space for millennia found themselves outmatched by defenses that incorporated the collective knowledge of every civilization the Council had ever wronged. By the time Thekvar's fleet reached the edge of the system, he had lost 37 vessels and seen his remaining forces battered beyond effective combat capability. It was the worst military defeat in Council history, and it had been delivered by a species that was supposed to be primitive and defenseless. Sir, his communications officer said hesitantly. "We're receiving another transmission from the humans." "Decline it," Thekvar snapped. He had no desire to endure further humiliation. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Galaxy-wide. Every species with receiver technology is going to hear this message." Thekvar closed his eyes, knowing that whatever was about to happen would be even worse than the military defeat his fleet had just suffered. "Put it through." Commander Park's image appeared again, but this time she wasn't standing on her platform's bridge. She was in what looked like a vast hangar, surrounded by beings from dozens of different species. Some Thekvar recognized as supposedly extinct civilizations. Others he didn't recognize at all, which suggested that the Council's records of their conquests were far from complete. "Citizens of the galaxy," Commander Park began, her voice carrying to every world, every ship, every outpost within range of galactic communication networks. "Today, the Galactic Council learned something important. They learned that extinction isn't always permanent, that conquest doesn't always last, and that some of us never forgot what freedom feels like." Behind her, the assembled beings raised weapons, banners, symbols of civilizations that the Council had tried to erase from history. Each one was a testament to the fact that the Council's absolute power had never been as absolute as they believed. For thousands of years, you've been told that the Council's rule is necessary for galactic peace, that their strength protects you from chaos and war, that submission is the price of survival. Commander Park's eyes blazed with conviction as she spoke. But what they haven't told you is the cost of that peace. How many worlds have been sterilized for the crime of innovation? How many species have been eliminated for refusing to bow? How many of your neighbors have simply vanished because they dared to dream of something better? The camera pulled back to show the true scope of the gathering. Thousands of beings filled the hangar, representing hundreds of supposedly extinct civilizations. Each one was a living reminder that the Council's version of history was built on lies. "Today, that changes," Commander Park continued. "Today, the galaxy learns that resistance is possible, that the Council bleeds just like anyone else, that their weapons can be stopped, their fleets defeated, their authority challenged." She gestured to the assembled crowd, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of centuries of rage and determination. "We are the Galactic Liberation Front. We are the children of civilizations that refused to die. We are the inheritors of technologies that were supposed to be forgotten. And we are here to offer every oppressed species in Council space a choice that you've never had before." The transmission shifted to show star charts marking dozens of systems throughout Council space, each one flashing with the symbol of active resistance movements. Worlds that were supposed to be pacified and compliant were suddenly revealing hidden military installations, concealed fleets, populations that had been secretly organizing for generations. "Join us," Commander Park said simply. "Fight for your freedom. Take back your worlds. Show the Council that their age of domination is over." The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. Across 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives under Council rule suddenly found themselves faced with possibilities they had never dared to imagine. Rebellion, liberation, hope. Aboard his battered flagship, Admiral Thekvar stared at the empty communication screen with the numb shock of someone who had just watched his entire worldview collapse. In a single day, humanity had revealed that they possessed advanced defensive technology, weapons from extinct civilizations, and a galaxy-wide network of resistance movements. They had turned what should have been a simple pacification mission into the greatest military and propaganda defeat in Council history. But perhaps worst of all, they had given hope to every oppressed species in the galaxy, and hope, Thekvar knew, was the most dangerous weapon of all. His tactical officer was already updating the threat assessment displays, marking human territory with the highest possible danger classifications. "Admiral, what are your orders? Do we attempt another assault?" Tekvar studied the readings that showed human reinforcements arriving from hidden bases throughout the sector. Each new ship that appeared on his sensors represented another failure of Council intelligence, another sign that everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. "Signal High Command," he said finally. "Tell them that we have a problem, a very big problem." As his fleet limped away from human space, carrying word of their defeat back to the Council chambers, Admiral Tekvar couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The humans had revealed their hand, but something told him that they had been holding back far more than they had shown. And if today's demonstration was just a warning shot, then the Council was in for a war unlike anything in their long and bloody history. Behind them, in human space, Commander Park stood at the observation deck of her station and watched the Council fleet retreat into the darkness. Around her, beings from 100 different worlds worked side by side, preparing for the battles to come. They had struck the first blow, but she knew that the real war was just beginning. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of Council dominance was ending, and humanity had just lit the fuse that would burn their empire to the ground. But as she watched the stars and thought about the challenges ahead, Commander Park found herself smiling. After 3 centuries of preparation, humanity was finally ready to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of, and the Council was about to learn that sometimes the prey becomes the hunter. 6 months after the first battle, the Galactic Council's emergency session convened in their ancient chambers on Valdris Prime. The massive amphitheater that had once echoed with the confident proclamations of galactic rulers now buzzed with panicked voices as representatives from 40,000 star systems tried to comprehend how their perfect order had descended into chaos so quickly. High Chancellor Mordak, supreme leader of the Council for the past 2 millennia, stood at the center of the chamber as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. His ancient form, kept alive by technology that predated most civilizations, trembled with rage as he absorbed the full scope of the disaster that had befallen his empire. 17 systems in open rebellion, announced the Zephyrian ambassador, her bioluminescent patches flashing with distress signals. "The Keftal sector has declared independence and seized our mining operations. 3 entire fleets have defected to join the Human Alliance. Our supply lines are being disrupted faster than we can repair them." "The situation in the Outer Rim is even worse," added Commander Veljosh of the Council Defense Forces. "The humans have somehow convinced 43 species to simultaneously rebel. Species that showed no signs of dissent for centuries are suddenly fielding military technologies we didn't even know they possessed." High Chancellor Mordak's compound eyes focused on the tactical displays showing the spread of rebellion across his domain. Red markers indicated systems in open revolt. Yellow marked those with suspected resistance activity, and green showed territories still under firm Council control. What he saw made his ancient heart skip in terror. The green was disappearing, replaced by an ever-growing cancer of red that threatened to consume everything he had built. "How?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic authority. "How did we fail to detect such a massive conspiracy? Our intelligence networks span the galaxy. Our monitoring systems watch every communication, every transport, every gathering of more than a dozen beings. How could the humans organize resistance on this scale without our knowledge?" Ambassador Zekthor, who had survived the initial confrontation with humanity, stepped forward with data that made the situation even worse. "They didn't organize it, Chancellor. They inherited it. Our investigation has revealed that resistance movements have been operating throughout Council space for millennia. They were simply waiting for someone to unite them and provide the technology needed to challenge our authority." The holographic display shifted to show a complex network of connections spreading across the galaxy like a vast underground root system. Hidden bases on supposedly barren worlds, smuggling routes that bypassed every monitoring station. Communication networks that used quantum entanglement principles the Council had banned precisely because they were impossible to intercept. The humans didn't create this network, Zekthor continued. They simply activated it. Every species we've conquered, every world we've pacified, every civilization we've corrected, left behind survivors. And those survivors have been preparing for this day for thousands of years. High Chancellor Mordak felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries, genuine fear. The Council's power had always rested on the assumption that they controlled the galaxy's military technology, that their weapons were so superior that resistance was impossible. But if the humans had somehow gathered together the collective knowledge of every civilization they had destroyed, then that advantage was gone. "What about the Omega Protocol?" he asked. "Surely the threat of planetary annihilation will bring the rebellious systems back into line." The silence that followed his question was more terrifying than any answer could have been. Finally, Fleet Admiral Korax spoke up, his mechanical voice heavy with defeat. "We tried, Chancellor. We targeted the human colony of New Geneva for complete sterilization. Our planet-killer fleet arrived in system with 12 dreadnoughts and full orbital bombardment capabilities. And? They were waiting for us. The humans had turned the entire system into a trap. Hidden weapons platforms throughout the asteroid belt. Cloaked ships positioned at every jump point. Defense technologies that we still don't understand." Admiral Korax's form flickered with data displays showing the battle reports. "We lost 11 of 12 dreadnoughts. The flagship barely escaped. The humans didn't just defeat our planet-killer fleet. They captured most of it intact." The assembled delegates erupted in shocked murmurs. A planet-killer fleet represented the Council's ultimate authority, their final argument when all else failed. The idea that such overwhelming force could not only be defeated but captured was beyond their comprehension. "That's not the worst part," Admiral Korax continued. "The humans broadcast the entire battle across the galaxy. Every species in Council space watched our most powerful weapons fail against their defenses. They turned our moment of ultimate strength into a demonstration of our weakness." High Chancellor Mordak closed his eyes, feeling the weight of galactic history pressing down on him. The Council had ruled for 10,000 years by maintaining the illusion of invincibility. They had convinced the galaxy that resistance was futile, that their technology was so advanced that challenging them was impossible. But the humans had shattered that illusion in a matter of months. "What do our intelligence analysts project for the future?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Director Velnara of Council Intelligence stepped forward, her compound eyes dim with exhaustion. "Complete systemic collapse within 18 months, Chancellor. The rebellion is spreading exponentially. Every victory the humans achieve inspires 3 more systems to revolt. Every Council defeat is broadcast across the galaxy, undermining our authority and encouraging further resistance." She activated new displays showing predictive models that painted an increasingly bleak picture. "The humans have introduced something into galactic politics that we've never had to deal with before. The concept of coordinated multi-species resistance. Previous rebellions were isolated events that we could crush individually. But this is different. This is a galaxy-wide movement with shared technology, unified command structure, and a common goal." "Which is what, exactly?" Mordak asked. "The complete overthrow of Council authority and the establishment of what they call a galactic republic, based on species self-determination and voluntary cooperation." The words hit the assembled delegates like physical blows. A galactic government based on voluntary cooperation rather than imposed authority was the antithesis of everything the Council stood for. It was chaos, anarchy, the end of the natural order that had maintained peace for millennia. Unacceptable, Mordak declared. Deploy the Convergence Fleet. Activate all reserve forces. Authorize the use of reality-ending weapons if necessary. This rebellion ends now, regardless of the cost. But Admiral Corex's mechanical form shifted to display new intelligence reports that made even that desperate option impossible. Chancellor, the Convergence Fleet has been compromised. The humans somehow infiltrated our most secure installations and corrupted the command protocols. Half our reserve forces have defected or gone offline, and our reality-ending weapons— He paused, his voice circuit struggling to process what he was about to reveal. The humans stole them. The chamber fell into absolute silence. The Council's reality-ending weapons were their most closely guarded secrets, devices capable of unraveling the fundamental structure of space-time itself. They were stored in the most secure facilities in Council space, protected by layers of security that should have been impossible to penetrate. How? Mordak whispered. We're still investigating, but preliminary reports suggest the humans have been planning this operation for decades. They used our own security protocols against us, exploiting vulnerabilities that we didn't even know existed. The theft was carried out by individuals with perfect Council credentials, using access codes that our systems recognized as legitimate. Admiral Corex displayed security footage that showed beings in Council uniforms calmly walking through restricted areas, their biometric signatures matching Council personnel records perfectly. But as the delegates watched in growing horror, they realized that some of those beings were humans, their appearances altered to mimic Council species. They've been among us, Admiral Corex continued. For years, possibly decades. Perfect infiltrators with false identities, legitimate credentials, and access to our most classified information. They know everything about our military capabilities, our strategic planning, our political structures. They've been studying us from the inside while we dismissed them as primitives. High Chancellor Mordak felt his ancient mind struggling to process the scope of the deception. The humans hadn't just prepared for war against the Council. They had infiltrated it so thoroughly that they probably knew Council plans before most Council members did. Every military operation, every political decision, every strategic initiative had been observed and analyzed by human intelligence. Sir, Director Velnara said hesitantly, there's something else. We've detected quantum communication signatures indicating that the humans are in contact with entities outside our galaxy, external powers that we know nothing about. The implication hung in the air like a death sentence. If humanity had allies beyond the galactic rim, if they were part of some larger interstellar community that the Council had never detected, then the scope of the threat was beyond anything they had imagined. Who? Mordak asked. Unknown. The communication methods are too advanced for us to intercept or decode. But the energy signatures suggest civilizations with technology that makes our own look primitive by comparison. As the reality of their situation settled over the assembled delegates, Mordak realized that the Council was facing something unprecedented in their long history. Not just a rebellion, but a coordinated campaign by forces that had been planning their downfall for centuries. The humans hadn't stumbled into resistance. They had been groomed for it by powers that understood exactly how to topple galactic empires. A new communication signal interrupted his dark thoughts. The main display activated to show a familiar face, Admiral Sarah Chen, the human who had first delivered their ultimatum 6 months ago. But now she wasn't standing in Earth's command center. She was aboard what was unmistakably a Council dreadnought, surrounded by beings from dozens of species, all wearing the insignia of the Galactic Liberation Front. High Chancellor Mordak, Admiral Chen said, with the same cold smile that had haunted his nightmares for months. I thought you'd like to know that your convergence fleet has officially joined the Liberation Front. Turns out that when you build your military with conscripts from conquered species, they're not particularly loyal when offered a chance at freedom. Behind her, the bridge of the captured dreadnought bustled with activity as former Council forces worked alongside human technicians to integrate the vessel into the rebel fleet. The symbolism was unmistakable. The Council's own weapons were being turned against them by the very species they had oppressed. "But I didn't call to gloat," Admiral Chen continued. "I called to offer you the same choice you once offered humanity. Surrender now, and your people will be allowed to live. Continue this futile resistance, and we'll demonstrate why evolution made us the galaxy's most persistent predators." The words were almost identical to those Mordak had spoken to countless species over the millennia, but hearing them directed at the Council filled him with a rage that transcended his ancient form's physical limitations. "You think you can threaten us?" he snarled. "We are the Galactic Council. We have ruled for 10,000 years. We will not be replaced by some upstart alliance of primitives and malcontents." Admiral Chen's smile widened, and Mordak realized that she had been hoping he would say exactly that. "Actually, Chancellor, we've already replaced you. While you've been sitting here debating how to stop us, we've been busy implementing our new governmental structure. The Galactic Republic was formally established 3 days ago, with representatives from over 6,000 star systems." The display shifted to show scenes from across the galaxy. Massive celebrations on worlds that had just declared independence, former Council installations being converted into Republic facilities, enemy fleets surrendering en masse as their crews joined the rebellion. The speed of the transformation was breathtaking, suggesting a level of coordination that had been years in the planning. "The transition of power is already underway," Admiral Chen explained. "Council administrative centers are being peacefully occupied. Military installations are surrendering without resistance. Your own people are abandoning you in favor of a system that offers them actual representation rather than imposed authority." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with the conviction of someone who had dedicated her life to this moment. "The age of the Council is over, Chancellor. The galaxy has chosen freedom over security, cooperation over domination, hope over fear. You can either accept this gracefully, or we can make the transition more educational." High Chancellor Mordak stared at the human admiral with hatred that burned like a dying star. Everything he had built, everything his predecessors had achieved, 10,000 years of galactic order, was crumbling around him. And it was all being destroyed by a species that 6 months ago had been nothing more than an entry in a database of primitive worlds. "Never," he whispered. "I will never surrender to you." Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Mordak saw something almost like pity in her eyes. "I didn't think you would. That's why we prepared for this possibility." The communication display split to show multiple viewpoints from across the galaxy, Council strongholds under siege, administrative centers surrounded by Republic forces. The final remnants of Council authority being systematically dismantled by the very forces they had once commanded. "Your empire is already gone, Chancellor," Admiral Chen said gently. "Your fleets have joined us, your colonies have declared independence. Your own Council members are defecting to the Republic faster than we can process their applications. The only question now is whether you want to go down as the leader who recognized when the fight was over, or the one who forced us to make an example of him." Mordak looked around the chamber at the faces of his fellow Council members and saw his own despair reflected in their eyes. In 6 months, humanity had accomplished what had seemed impossible. They had turned the galaxy's most powerful empire into a hollow shell, ready to collapse at the slightest touch. But even as he faced the end of everything he had known, Mordak couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for the species that had orchestrated his downfall. The humans had played a game that lasted centuries, moving pieces across the galactic board with patience and precision that put the Council's own strategic planning to shame. They had turned the galaxy's oppressed populations into a weapon, used the Council's own strength against them, and replaced tyranny with something that might actually prove more stable in the long run. "What happens to us?" he asked finally. "Trial, probably," Admiral Chen replied honestly. "The Republic believes in justice, not revenge. You'll have the opportunity to defend your actions before representatives of every species you've wronged. Some of you might even be allowed to retire quietly if you cooperate with the transition." She paused, studying his ancient face with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "The galaxy is changing, Chancellor, but change doesn't have to mean destruction. The Republic could use leaders with your experience if you're willing to serve the people rather than ruling them." High Chancellor Mordak closed his compound eyes and felt the weight of galactic history settle on his shoulders. The Council was finished, that much was clear. But perhaps there was still a chance to shape what came next, to ensure that the transition to this new order didn't result in the complete chaos he feared. "I'll need guarantees," he said finally, "for my people, for the Council worlds, for the civilian populations that had no part in our military actions." "You'll have them," Admiral Chen promised. "The Republic doesn't believe in collective punishment. We're not interested in replacing one tyranny with another." As the communication ended and the reality of surrender settled over the chamber, Mordak realized that perhaps this was always how it was meant to end. Empires rose and fell, but the galaxy endured. The humans had simply accelerated a process that was already underway, replacing a system based on fear with one built on hope. 3 hours later, High Chancellor Mordak stood before the assembled delegates of the new Galactic Republic and formally surrendered the authority of the Council. It was the end of an era. But as he watched beings from 1,000 different worlds work together to build something better, he found himself cautiously optimistic about what they might achieve. The humans had kept their promise. They had shown the galaxy what they were truly capable of. And what they were capable of, it turned out, was something far more dangerous than conquest or destruction. They were capable of inspiring others to be better than they had ever dreamed possible. The galaxy would never be the same. But perhaps for the first time in 10,000 years, that was exactly what it needed.